Hello, class. So we're continuing on with our geographic origins of world religions. Now we understand that religions are very much integrated into culture, and the way that cultural geographies manifest themselves can be represented in the display of the landscape. So from a religious geography standpoint, we like to look at a couple different things. As you're familiar, we examine the historical diffusions of peoples and the peoplings of the territories. This can be often examined through different types of diffusion patterns, be they just the simplistic spatial diffusion of the spread of something that we've declared exists in that zone, and then the more explanative diffusion approaches, which is a cultural diffusion where practices polysynchronize over time through the practices of people. And again, we look at relocation diffusion, how somebody believes something here moves to another place, and these ideas spread. And so we get very much of a sense of how ideas and concepts and innovation travels through embodiment. We have a great mathematician. He can go somewhere else and teach other people math. And pretty soon we have a school arising in a particular area. Okay, so we concluded with a little bit of a bookmark in Judaism in the first century with obviously kind of the Roman destruction of the temple by Titus, and then going further into the second century, in the early second century, which the Roman-Jewish Civil War, and the further expulsion and scattering of peoples from Palestine and Jewish peoples from Palestine. Okay, we can kind of talk about how that goes back variously to Babylon, and peoples going to Europe, and to just some different types of patterns that happen with rabbinicism and the process of that. But we're not going to get that advanced into it, and I'm not expert enough to really provide a decent explanation. So let's carry back on to the first century BC, about 4 BC, which we've said we've adjusted as the appropriate time of Jesus's birth. Now we consider this the AD, or the Anno Domini, which is sometimes coined as the year that Jesus was born. We also refer to it as historians as the Common Era, so you'll see CE there quite a bit as well. So beginning in the Levant, obviously Jesus was born in Galilee, which is in Palestine. I mean, well, he lived in Palestine and Galilee. We can kind of talk about whether or not he was born in Bethlehem. But anyways, that doesn't really matter too much. With the death and presumptive resurrection of Christ, according to the adherents, we have a religious event which emanates from this epicenter zone. We then see the dispersion of apostles across these territories to help enhance and spread the religious geography through their embodiment. We have peoples like Thomas going all the way into India to spread the religion. We have Mark going all the way down into Egypt. And eventually we even have some of these apocryphal claims, which may or may not be true, of peoples like Andrew reaching Scotland, or other peoples going all the way into Europe. So we can kind of get a better sense of this. You can study experts online and plenty of YouTube videos that will help you learn a lot more about this than I can teach you. But what I can do for you is provide you an intelligent, logistical, geographic conceptual toolkit to try to examine why this was so effective and how these ideas diffused. Okay, there's political geography to take into account very quickly. As we discussed with some of the overlordship of Israel in the past, we had kind of this tension between the Ptolemaic Greek-speaking dynasty and the Seleucid Greek-speaking dynasty. But what we do know is that there were a lot of Greek-speaking peoples. We also know that Palestine was run and controlled by the Romans at the time, whose official language was Latin. And this spread all the way over to the Atlantic coast and to the early conquests of Britain, which were going on around this time, and again to large parts of North Africa. So if you have anyone who has a little bit of multilingualism, then you could spread a message very concretely from Aramaic-speaking Israel. If you knew a little bit of Greek, you could communicate with people as far away from India. And if you could speak a bit of the Latin, which was probably a little bit required of everyone, although maybe not so much in rural areas under the dominion of Rome, but you communicate all the way over to the Atlantic coast. So we had a great tinderbox for ideas to spread. You'll see a similar type of apropos circumstance arising for Islam, and it has to do with the physical geography. So you have this linguistic polyglot of peoples, but you have the ability to communicate ideas from one very different group of people to the next. Okay, I could sit here and talk about how this functions a little bit more, but I think we can conceptualize it better by looking at a visual representation. We are geographers, so we'll bring out our trusty map. This is something I advise you to do whenever you look at the movement of peoples or the peopling of a terrain. or the rise and fall of empires. Let's look at a spatial representation of things at their height and at their, their smallest territorial dominion. So we have this particular video, which I think will be helpful for you students. Let's just examine very quickly this time-elapsed map of the spatial diffusion of Christianity. So we see rising in the Mediterranean world from Antioch in Turkey and obviously in the Jerusalem area. Right about this point, you're going to see the fall of the Western Roman Empire with some of the Gothic invasions. This doesn't change the predominance and spread of Christianity. It continues on in the east, obviously, the Byzantium Empire. But you even see, as of this point coming up, the Frankish and other Germanic tribes adopting the language, and essentially the Holy Roman Empire being established right now, which is the relationship between some of the Western Germanic Christian tribes and Rome, making them some of the earliest Catholics. So you kind of see some quarrels rising between Western papal states and the Eastern Orthodoxy under the Byzantine Empire, and eventually this kind of results in some of the dissolution of the Byzantine Empire, sadly through some of the crusades of fellow Christians, but also through the conquest of Islam through the Ottoman Empire. Now we'll talk a little bit more about how Islam expanded into Christian domains in the North Africa Southwest a little later, but let's continue on with the progression of Christianity here into the Americas through the Iberian explorers, into Southeast Asia, into the Philippines through the Spanish as well, and through the colonial enterprise of Europeans into the African coastlands, and slowly and eventually into the inland. Currently we have sub-Saharan Africa representing potentially the largest region of Christians in the world. So, it's been very much a result of expansion diffusion. The spread of ideas have been assisted through these historical processes, and it continues to expand.